The rain had been falling all morning, the kind that didn't roar but whispered, soft, steady, endless. It turned the narrow streets of the small town into thin ribbons of silver, where puddles caught the faint glow of the street lamps. The air carried that damp, metallic scent of wet pavement, and the sky was a washed-out gray, heavy with unspoken sadness. James had been in his workshop since dawn, the hiss of the rain mixing with the occasional clang of his tools. His hands were covered in black grease, nails stained permanently dark from years of fixing cars that were older than their owners could remember. The heater in his shop had broken 3 days ago, so the cold settled into his bones. He had been fighting a dull headache since morning, the kind that pressed behind the eyes like an invisible hand. By mid-afternoon, he decided he'd had enough. He cleaned his tool slowly, wiping the wrench as if it might distract him from the aching throb in his skull. He was used to the silence, used to finishing his day without talking to anyone but customers. And yet, when he stepped outside and locked the shop door, the town felt a little too quiet, like it was holding its breath. That's when he saw her. Across the narrow street, on the weathered steps of an old apartment building, sat a little girl. She looked like she didn't belong to the scene, too delicate, too still, like a porcelain figure someone had forgotten in the rain. The oversized pink sweater she wore swallowed her tiny frame, the sleeves covering her hands completely. Her knees were pulled up to her chest, her shoes damp from the wet concrete. James paused, squinting through the rain. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9. Her brown hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, but strands had escaped, plastering themselves to her pale cheeks. Her lips were pressed together in that way kids do when they're trying hard not to shiver. He crossed the street without thinking, his boots splashing through shallow puddles. "Hey there," he called gently, not wanting to startle her. "You all right?" Her head lifted slowly. For a moment, she didn't answer, just blinked up at him with eyes that seemed far too tired for someone her age. Then she managed a small, almost apologetic smile. "I'm okay," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "I just can't get up the stairs by myself today." James glanced at the staircase behind her, 20 steep, narrow steps leading to a door on the upper floor. The banister looked old and wobbly, the kind of thing you wouldn't trust to hold your weight. "Where's your mom or dad?" he asked, his voice carrying a mix of concern and caution. "They're working," she whispered, hugging her knees a little tighter. Then she leaned forward slightly, as if sharing something conspiratorial. "If you carry me up the stairs," she said softly, "I'll tell you a secret." James blinked, caught off guard. "A secret?" She nodded, her eyes serious despite the faint smile. "A very important one." He studied her for a long moment. Something about her reminded him of his little sister when she was small, before life had pulled her to a different city, before they had grown apart. Without another word, he crouched down in front of her. "All right," he said gruffly, trying to mask the concern in his tone, "hop on." She didn't hop, she simply leaned forward, and he scooped her up easily. She was so light it startled him, she felt less like a child and more like a bundle of thin blankets. Her head rested on his shoulder, and he could feel the warmth of her cheek even through the dampness of the rain. Each step up the staircase felt deliberate. He was careful not to jostle her, aware of how fragile she seemed. The rain dripped from the edge of the roof above, hitting his jacket in soft taps. Halfway up, she let out a small sigh, the kind that sounded both content and exhausted. By the time they reached the landing, James could hear her breathing slowing. She wasn't asleep, but she was close. He shifted her gently in his arms and glanced at the door in front of them. "You still owe me that secret," he reminded her, his tone light. She smiled faintly, her eyelids drooping. "Tomorrow," she murmured. "I'm too tired today." James set her down carefully, watching her shuffle to the door and fumble with the key. Something about the way she moved, slightly unsteady, but determined, stuck with him. As she pushed the door open, she turned her head just enough to give him one last small smile before disappearing inside. He stood there for a moment longer, listening to the quiet rain, before heading back down the stairs. The image of her pale face and tired eyes followed him all the way home. The next day, the rain had stopped, leaving behind streets that smelled faintly of wet earth and metal. The sun had managed to push its way through the thick clouds, and now light spilled over the cracked sidewalks, making yesterday's puddles glisten like shards of glass. James hadn't planned on looking for her. He told himself he was just taking his usual walk to the market, same as always. But his steps slowed when he reached the old apartment building, and his eyes, without his permission, searched the worn steps. She was there. This time, she was sitting upright, clutching a small, worn-out stuffed bunny in her lap. Its fur was matted from years of hugs, one ear hanging limply by a few threads. She was dressed in the same oversized pink sweater, but her cheeks carried a hint of color today. "You didn't tell me your secret yesterday," James said as he approached, his voice light, though something inside him already ached with curiosity and concern. She tilted her head, studying him for a moment before speaking. "I will," she said at last. "But first, you have to carry me again." James chuckled softly, though it was a little forced. "That's a sneaky way to get free rides." Her expression didn't change, if anything, it grew more serious. "I don't have many days left," she said suddenly, her voice barely more than a whisper. James froze. "What do you mean?" She didn't look away. Her eyes were calm in a way that made his stomach twist. "The doctors say my heart, it's tired. That's why the stairs are so hard. Sometimes, I can't breathe right when I try." For a moment, James couldn't speak. He stared at her, the small figure in front of him, and wondered how a child could say something so final with such steady composure. He searched her face for a hint of fear, but there was none, only acceptance. Finally, he crouched down in front of her again, softer this time, his voice low. "Well," he said, "in that case, you've got yourself a personal stair chauffeur." Her lips curved into the smallest smile, and she reached her arms toward him. As he lifted her, James was struck by just how weightless she felt, like holding a moment you knew could slip away at any time. He took the stairs slowly, his boots finding each step carefully. Halfway up, she rested her chin on his shoulder. "My secret," she whispered, "is that I think you're my hero. Even though you don't know me. Even though no one else ever stops to help." James felt something in his chest tighten, the words hitting deeper than he expected. His throat ached with a sudden lump, and for a moment he was glad she couldn't see his face. "Well," he said gruffly, "heroes don't charge for stair rides." When they reached her door, he set her down gently. She kept hold of her stuffed bunny but didn't move to unlock the door right away. "You know," she said quietly, "most people just walk past. Some smile, but they never stop. But you did, and that's what makes you different." James swallowed, feeling strangely unsteady. "Maybe it's because I know what it's like to need someone to stop," he said without thinking, surprising himself with the honesty. She looked at him for a long moment, as if she understood more than a child should. Then she smiled again, that same faint, tired but warm smile, and unlocked her door. "Tomorrow?" she asked before slipping inside. James nodded. "Tomorrow." He stood there a while after she closed the door, staring at the wood grain and chipped paint as though it held answers. Then, finally, he turned and headed down the stairs, the faint scent of rain still lingering in the air. That night, lying in bed, her words replayed in his mind over and over, "I think you're my hero." He had never been anyone's hero before. But somehow, in a quiet way, it felt like the most important job he'd ever been given. Days passed. Every afternoon, James would find her waiting. They never talked about her illness again, but they shared small stories, her favorite ice cream flavor, his dreams of fixing up an old motorcycle, her love for stargazing. Then one evening, she wasn't there. He waited for hours. A neighbor finally came down and told him, voice heavy, her condition, it got worse. "She's in the hospital." James didn't think, he ran. When he arrived, she was in a pale blue gown, a tangle of wires and beeping machines around her. Her eyes lit up when she saw him. "You came," she whispered. He took her tiny hand in his. "Of course I did. You still owe me a secret." She smiled faintly. "The real secret is, you made the last days the happiest I've had. And, I'm not afraid anymore." James's vision blurred. He leaned down and whispered, "Then my secret is, you're the bravest person I've ever met." That night, holding her hand, he felt the gentle squeeze, and then the stillness. She was gone, but her secret would live in his heart forever. In the end, James realized that what started as a simple act of kindness, carrying a little girl up a flight of stairs, had quietly become the most meaningful connection of his life. Day after day, their brief moments together had filled his heart in ways he didn't understand at first. She had given him something no one else had in years, a reason to look forward to tomorrow. When she was gone, her absence was heavy, but her words stayed with him, echoing like a quiet promise, "You're my hero." It wasn't just a compliment, It was a reminder that small acts of love could mean the world to someone. From then on, James carried that lesson the way he once carried her, gently, carefully, knowing it was precious. And though he would never again climb those stairs with her in his arms, he would spend the rest of his life making sure no one else had to wait alone at the bottom. Because sometimes, the smallest kindness is the greatest secret a heart can hold.